Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content, and before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, so the Luka LeBron duo debut in LA has finally arrived. We had a couple of games to look at, right? One both against the Utah Jazz, one both not very close, one in a win, one in a loss. But in both games you could kind of see, right, the combination of those two guys being able to kind of, create whatever offense they want to. You can see Luka being able to set guys up with the extra pass, right? With the ability to kind of make improvisational passes off the dribble, right, where he kind of gets to these spots. He's doing a Euro step. It looks like he's going to do a layup, and then at the last second, he kicks it to like a Rui Hachimura in the corner, right? Then you see Austin Reeves kind of being able to figure out on the fly, how he kind of has to, react to being the third option now, as opposed to, I guess, the third option behind LeBron and AD, and then recently more so like the second option behind LeBron. Right, so there's a lot of different moving parts here. Then you can even see Jackson Hayes as a center, right? In the first game, he was able to just kind of run up and down the floor and get lobs and just catch easy baskets in the paint. Those are the type of centers that do work really well next to Luka. And then you kind of see the ability where they have all these wings that they can put out there: Dorian Finney-Smith, Rui, LeBron, Vanderbilt. Then you even like a Gabe Vincent, you throw him in there. It's just obviously, once guys kind of get hurt or unavailable, that's where it starts to get a little bit ugly. Because in the second game, no Dorian Finney-Smith, no Gabe Vincent, they get blown out, and they're kind of forced to sort of patch different pieces together. Right, Alex Len, the last time we met and talked, he was supposed to go to the Pacers, but then the Mark Williams trade fell through. Right, so then after that debacle, right, then Len sees an opening to go to LA. He comes in, plays a lot more minutes than I think you would have expected, right? Because Hayes gets the start. Then he gets hurt early on, so he can't finish the game. Len plays a lot more, and you can kind of see, like, where it's like, yeah, he's probably not like a 20-plus minute a game guy at this point, right? It's kind of a random signing, right? Just because, initially it seemed like he was going to go to Indiana. Indiana replaced him with Jahlil Okafor, right? So congratulations on his return back into the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
But, again, we talked about with the Lakers roster, one of the weaknesses is the front court, right? Especially that center spot where you just don't really have any great options physically speaking, right? Where you can kind of match up with some of the big front courts, right, in the NBA, right? When your starting center is Jackson Hayes and you're going to ask him to guard like a Jokic, right? Or, a Gobert or Embiid, like certain types of matchups, it's just kind of tough, right? The more physical, big matchups, right? That's going to be a problem for them. They've been able to overcome it in a lot of these games where they use their wings and their speed, right? Where they can kind of get away with playing small, playing fast, playing physical, and then that's been able, because they've actually been one of the best defensive teams in the last, month or so. But obviously once you get to the playoffs, right, things are going to look a little bit different. But even with that horrible Utah loss, right, it's the right into the All-Star break. Those type of weird games happen all the time in the NBA. But when we saw, in terms of the stat lines, right, in the first game, right, Luka basically is like 14, 5, and 4, right? And again, the three-point shot isn't really there right now, but he also hadn't played basketball in like almost 2 months. So he kind of expected a little bit of rust. But the good moments, right, when they were good, they were really good, right? And you can see that takes some pressure off LeBron. That kind of gives him the ability to kind of, be able to pick his spots even more on offense. And, then you can also kind of look around, right? And you kind of see once this guy gets going and he's off his minutes restriction and he's got the ball in his hands a little bit more, right? Then that kind of just, like I said, frees things up for everyone else. So I think offensively it's going to look really good as they kind of go on and figure some stuff out. Especially come playoff time, it should be pretty good. It's just the question is, will the defense be sustainable in a way where, can you trust a lot of these guys against certain matchups? Certain matchups, they'll probably be fine. But then there's other matchups where it may be a little bit more problematic. But now you have a guy where he could be the best player on the floor, right? And once Luka's healthy.
Yeah, I think they've built somewhat of a solid foundational building block here. I think obviously you can build from the ground up with Luka on any team, but I think you do have some solid pieces that do accompany him. Like I am kind of intrigued about the Austin Reeves fit. I do like that.
Mhm.
It seems like he kind of plays off of him better than a lot of people expected. Jackson Hayes as well, especially in the first game, like you said. But you have the wings, I think, at least some of them that you would kind of need, like the prototypical one, where you have like, a Dorian Finney-Smith, Jared Vanderbilt. Like that's why I hope that they kind of maybe move on from Rui in the offseason and find a better upgrade, but who knows? But,
Mhm.
I think if you surround him with wings like that, that's going to help. I think they do need a little bit better shooting around him because I think you do need to follow the Dallas mold because that was so, successful. That's what got them to the finals. So I think you do need to kind of figure out a way to replicate that in what they did in Dallas. But, outside of that, I've kind of been pretty impressed with how seamless it has looked, like you said, when things are going good. But when they are bad, I mean, it really is just chalking it up to just missing shots and really being rusty because it's not like they're bad shots or, horrible takes or anything like that. It's really just wide open stuff that's really not going in. But, it's still pretty shocking to see him in a Laker uniform. And yeah,
Yeah.
I am curious, like you said, what it looks like defensively because I wish, LeBron was maybe like 35. That would have been sweet because the problem is both of these guys are just not really defensively there at all on any given night. So I am
Yeah,
curious what
and
that
he's been
looks like in the
better.
long haul. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's been much better, I think, since that earlier stretch in the
Mm-hmm.
season, right? Like, because early December, was kind of like his worst stretch,
Yep.
right? Where we were kind of talking about, like, hey, what's going on here, right?
Right.
But since then, over the last couple of months, he's been significantly better, on both ends, right? Because even
Mm-hmm.
offensively, that early stretch, right? He was missing a lot of shots, right? People talked about the 3-point stretch where he was just, like 1 for 20 or something like
Yeah.
that across a number of games. But that's pretty much kind of fixed up now. And again, they're going to need him to be, better on that end of the floor defensively for them to, kind of get to whatever the best version they can be. And that helps, right? When you have another guy who can take the pressure off of you offensively. With the Mark Williams thing, right? It just comes down to the physicals, right?
Yeah.
Because I think we didn't have all that information the last time we spoke, right? But since then, basically it's kind of the idea that they found some stuff that I guess they didn't really like, and so they ended up rescinding the deal. They could have accepted it, but they didn't want to, right? So they were probably scared off by that. And then Charlotte, I guess, is trying to do whatever they can to get that through. I don't think it will, right? Because at this point, it's kind of too little, too late for
Yeah.
that.
For real. Yeah.
But yeah, and it's funny, right? Because the guys that were in those trades, right, they're back with their teams. We haven't seen Mark Williams play since
I
that point,
wonder
right?
why.
I don't even think he's been out due to injury. I think he just hasn't played. But we did see Connect the other night, and Reddish wasn't really part of the rotation, but he had been out because he had personal stuff. I think it was the birth of a child. So
Yeah. And I mean,
yeah, but he,
it is interesting, like the whole
Mhm.
thing, because I really am, like we said in the short, like I think we're both pretty excited for what, the Lakers can do and build with Luka, because I think the sky is the limit when you do have a player like that, and you can really either go big or small. I think they should go big, and obviously Luka's going to be the point, and I think everybody should be 6, 7, and up in the starting rotation, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's where it's gonna be kind of fun to see what their best lineup ends up looking
Yes,
like
sir.
which guys next to Luca, LeBron, and Austin, are gonna be in that possibly closing lineup because they're not gonna probably close a lot of games, with their starting five, right?
Right.
Because some of their better lineups now have been a little bit on the smaller end, and in the last 15 games, right? You look at their offense, sixth offensively, right? And then defensively, they've been fourth, and that's the last 15 games, which is a pretty significant sample size, honestly. So, I mean, that's where again, the defense is kind of where they've made their improvements because earlier in the season, their offense was pretty good,
Yeah.
but their defense was really awful, right? I think at one point we were talking they were like a bottom five defense, right? But now, since then they've been able to patch that up even without AD, and it's not like they're better defensively without AD. It's just different, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of they're forced into playing a different style defensively than they were before. They've gotten up to 17 now, right? Which again, that's an improvement because before they were, like 25 or something like that. So that's where, again, different roster, different look. Because some of it's you're putting in other defensive players like Dorian Finney-Smith. He swapped D'Lo out for him, right? Then Vanderbilt wasn't playing at all. Hadn't played in like a year. He comes back, right? He looks pretty solid. Gabe Vincent, he looks pretty solid on the defensive end, and now he can hit shots, right? Where for about a year and a half, he was basically cardio Gabe, right? Where he just couldn't really give you anything offensively, even though the defense was always fine. but now you're getting a better version of him. And that's huge, right? Because that was a guy that they signed expecting to be a good two-way player. And he wasn't that for most of his tenure, but recently he's been much better. I mean, like, I think in terms of his three-point percentages, right? I mean, I think career now, because earlier in the season, right, and last year, he was like, barely above, 10% from three. I think last year was like 11%
Yeah, it
from
was
three.
bad. People were like, "This is
Yeah,
one of
and
the
then
worst
even this,
signings."
right? Yeah, exactly. And then even this year, right, earlier in the year, right, he was shooting, like this about the same percentage. But now on the season, he's right now on the season, I believe, yeah, he's up to 35%,
Yeah,
which would be regular season wise his second best shooting percentage, right? Which again,
solid.
that's a pretty good improvement from where it was, like I said, last year and then earlier this season. So,
Yeah,
again, they got some better depth pieces now, I think, than they probably did a year ago, right? Where now you don't have to play like a Cam Reddish, and some of the other guys that they were relying on. Obviously, to make room for Alex Len, they had to waive Christian Wood, who just hasn't played since like last year. Could have
yeah,
been a helpful piece in the rotation, maybe just as an offensive stretch big. Maybe you hope for Maxi Kleba at some point to come back, but he's got the broken foot. He could be out for most of the rest of the season, probably the rest of the regular season. So, again, either way, they're 1-1, but it's against Utah. Take it with a grain of salt. And then only one of those games did we get to see their main guys. So,
yeah.
yeah. Then after that, I guess, we already kind of talked about the Butler thing a little bit more, you know, the last time we recorded, right? Obviously, we talked about the strengths, right? Where he now can get to the free throw line. He can help you with your offense when Steph's off the floor, right? He's still, like a pretty tested, battle tested veteran guy, right? So, again, we already know the good qualities, and I think it's nice to see him playing like he cares now, right? Compared to
Right.
before, right? Where he just clearly was like throwing games away. Again, the main thing for them is that it's just, can they get to the playoffs? Because, even with it seems like they look better, but just the problem is with the lack of games left, it's just you got to find a way to get up to, you got to get out of that ideal lead 9-10 spot. And they could. It's just, it may not be the easiest thing in the world to do, especially when there have been games for most of the season where you can kind of say that was a missed opportunity, right? Like they had a game the other night, right, where they played the Mavs without AD,
Hmm.
without Gafford, without, whomever, right? They've been just brutally demolished by injuries, right? Which actually we might as well get into that too, since I don't think at the time we knew how bad the situation was. But a game like that they lose. Games like the Jazz and other games. We don't have to get into it too much, but you can
Sure.
see the benefits of having him on the team. It just would have been nice had they had a little bit more wiggle room. And I'm not saying they can't make it because I think they'll make it. It's just it's better to, it just would have been nice if they had given themselves more room for error earlier in the season. But that was
Hmm.
just a lot of that was because of the roster. And you're getting a better version of Steph too, I think, which
Yeah.
that's also going to help a lot.
Yeah, like I think that's the main point and main takeaway is, bringing in Jimmy Butler takes so much attention away from Steph because I think you have to respect both of them. Obviously, we know they're both different players and we know their games are very different, but you still have to respect them from, the areas that they're great at. And, Steph's been pretty solid in the past, like 3 games or so. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
the Dallas loss really does hurt and you can't really afford
Mm-hmm.
to drop games like that. But, I think they both look pretty good. So I do like that aspect where Jimmy is really making things easier for Steph, and that's how it should be. That's the best way to extend your championship window, and that's obviously what the Warriors are trying to do with a move like this. Desperate move, but desperate times call for desperate measures, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think can they win it this year? Probably not, just because of how the season has gone. Can they be a feisty, competitive team that who knows? Maybe they can knock out somebody in the first round. Maybe.
Yeah,
I think that. I mean, again, because they had to do it. Because if they just kind of stood pat, they would have missed the playoffs. And then
yeah.
what do they do in the summer? But I guess the question is, does that make it worth it to that they didn't go after the other guys that they could have gone after now that given what they got, who they got in return, and what they had to give up? Because they didn't really have to give up, too many significant guys outside of Wiggins.
Hmm. I think it's worth it, but You know, I don't
Mhm.
know because the only problem I have is really Jimmy's age. How much longer are you going to get top tier level of production? That's
Mhm.
the thing that's kind of ticking me off is where does the longevity? I'm not really seeing that. I'm seeing it as a here and now thing, but are
Mhm.
you even prepared and that well equipped to even win here and now? That's where I'm just on the fence about the whole thing.
Right. Yeah, and again, like, you look at the standings and, right now they're in 10th place, which again, that could easily change.
Hmm.
Depending on what goes on, between now and the next few weeks, but, it's just again, the standings race is going to be fun just because of the fact that you have a lot of these teams that are going to be vying for different spots. But in order for them to get out of the play-in, they're going to have to leapfrog, a few teams, and they could, but it might be tough because I don't know if they can get out of. I don't know if they can escape the play-in because the Clippers have been solid enough where they could probably stay at that sixth spot as long as they don't fall off because they had a pretty tough schedule earlier in the season. But I think, in terms of like the strength of schedule remaining, the Clippers do have, I guess, no, never mind. They do have a tougher schedule. They have the sixth toughest schedule. Golden State's is 20th. So they have a relatively easy schedule, but it still doesn't help that they blew some of the other games from earlier in the season, right?
Right.
But again, even a team like Minnesota, they have the 23rd easiest or toughest schedule, right? So that means their schedule's not that difficult. Houston, Dallas. So they're all on par with each other, and they'll have games where they'll be playing each other. So that's also going to make a difference because, again, like Dallas getting a win against Golden State, that helps them with the tiebreaker, right?
Right.
Yeah, so, and again, like I think they'll play one more time, right? So that could make a difference. But, again, games like that, it's different.
Mm-hmm. Can't drop them.
And yeah, and then speaking of Dallas, right?
Oh
We
boy.
talked about them the last time, right? Where we talked about AD's debut, right, and how well he played, but but we recorded it on that same day I think that he played, right?
Yep.
So at the time we knew that he got hurt, but we didn't know the extent. But now we know, unfortunately, right, with the adductor injury, he's going to be out for at least a few weeks, right? Which that's brutal, right? Where you trade your franchise guy, you bring in AD, right, and he plays awesome in his first game, right? It looks great. Everybody's feeling good. The crowd's going nuts. Then he gets hurt after being pretty healthy the last couple of seasons, right? It's not like he's been, a street clothes guy like people say. He's been pretty healthy the last couple of
Yeah.
years, right? But then first game with a new team, he gets hurt, and then it just makes everything look even worse, right? Because then you got the team governor for the Mavs, he's getting booed, right? You got the timeout, I guess, breaks activities that they do where they have people, saying fire Nico Harrison, right? It's
Yeah.
just
And they're
not a
getting
great look.
removed from the stadium as well for
Yeah,
saying
and
that.
yeah, and again, they've been able to kind of just have some of these games where they're able to just kind of hang on, but I don't know. It might be kind of tough for them to continue to, stay in that spot. I mean, again, they've won just enough games where it's like in their last 10, they're 500, right? Which is all you can really ask for, right? Given the
Yeah.
state that they're in, and they got some wins, like they got the win over Boston, right? Kind of an unlikely, improbable win. Got the win shorthanded against Golden State. They got a win over the Rockets. So they've been able to get, steal some wins here and there where it's kind of been able to keep them afloat, right? I think they're playing the Miami Heat right now. That could probably end by the time, our episode is done. But it just is it's unfortunate, right? Because it just feels like the goodwill that seemingly had been built up with the franchise now is just kind of gone. Where it's like it feels like there's a very negative vibe and feeling between the fans and the organization right now. It does nobody really looks great right now, and like you just kind of feel bad for the fans.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like they were, before the trade, I think they were one of the more blessed franchises because, to go from Dirk straight to Luka, I think is a blessing because sometimes, the wait for a superstar is 30 plus years for some teams, post title or something like that. So, for them to be able to have, a guy like Luka, but, now he's just gone. And I feel like the return is what people are really pissed at.
Mhm.
I think they wanted probably AD and more. That was the issue. I think the deal was too tit for tat, where the value of Anthony Davis just doesn't equate to what, Luka is. And I think, they probably wanted picks, more of a future, because now you're kind of on the fence about it, because now you're getting the worst of AD, where he's simply not available. And that's the struggle, I think. And, to trade for a guy who is not, the healthiest of all time, career wise, I think that's the
Mhm.
part that probably stings a lot for them as well, because they were hurt for a lot of this year, and you bring in another guy who just gets hurt automatically in his debut. It's rough. And yeah, I think you're right. The disconnect is probably larger than it's ever been between the fans, the coach, GM, all the moving parts of an organization. Like, it just does not look good at all. And even like the governor's comments about Luka, basically saying that he doesn't have work ethic and stuff like that. A lot of this
Yeah,
stuff doesn't really make sense. Like, it
right.
just
And
feels
then the
weird,
name,
you know?
yeah, and then some of the names that he brought up and
Yeah, didn't even
compared
say
them to, right?
Shaq. I was
Yeah,
like,
and again, like he still had a career that most people would dream to have,
yeah,
right? It's just he's not usually known as a guy that had like the greatest work ethic for a
yeah.
star player,
Well, wasn't that the
right?
problem? And he didn't. The owner or governor didn't even mention Dirk.
You're right.
I don't understand it. It's the weirdest situation of all time.
Hmm.
From the jump when they had the press conference, with the general manager and Jason Kidd, I was like, yeah, this is not good, because Jason Kidd was like, why am I here? Like, it just
Yeah,
doesn't make sense, from the Mavs
yeah,
perspective.
yeah. It just feels rough. Where it's
Yeah,
just you kind of wonder where you go from here. I mean, the only way that feeling probably goes away is with a title, probably two. But I
yeah,
mean,
right.
are they going to be able to get one? Because I feel like we saw a lot in that first game, but it was still only one game.
Yeah,
But, and that's the tough part where it's like, you know, like you said, even before the trade, they had a lot of injuries because that was a team that I think most of us felt like neither of us picked them to make the finals, but we certainly felt like they could get there because we thought that this team had improved from last year. And we just
yeah,
didn't really get to see a whole lot of that because of all the injuries, right?
yeah,
Like, I mean, Kyrie had the bulging disc. Luka had been out for most of the season when he was playing in Dallas.
yeah.
I mean, look around the rest of the roster, right? Like I think Lively, right? He's been out for a while.
Yep.
I mean, PJ Washington, I think Najee Marshall was out for a long time. I think
Mm-hmm.
with some type of illness. So just a really rough season for them, anyways. And like I said, they've been tough. They've been able to kind of hang on here and there, but
Because they've got so many vets and experience. That's the main thing keeping them alive, I feel like.
right.
Because you've got
Yeah, and
guys
they,
like
and in
Clay.
fairness, they do have a lot of depth.
Yeah.
And they were able to add to some of that, right? Because like Max Christie, who we had talked about as a Laker, had been playing really, really well. Now is in Dallas, still playing really, really well, right? Where you can see, why Laker fans, myself included, were very high on him.
Yeah.
Where you can see, what he brings on both ends of the floor. Good rebounder, right? That's a guy that's a guy that can be a really helpful player in a lot of spots, especially for, a team like that where now they're, I guess, doubling down on their defensive identity. So hopefully AD can come back and, be relatively just fine. It's just
Yeah.
tough because, again, I mean, at least a few weeks. I mean, he may not be back until March.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
that's a
depending on where the Mavs
reevaluation.
are. Yeah, depending on where the Mavs are at that point, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but either way, after that, now we're getting into the All-Star weekend, right?
Oh
Because
boy.
yeah, I mean, obviously we had, and like there are other trades, of course, that we've talked about. Like we mentioned, Fox and the Spurs. That's more of a long-term deal, I think, than now, right? There's still some weird stuff with Chris Paul and De'Aaron Fox starting together, but
Yeah.
uh, yeah, and then the Levine one to Sacramento is weird because they have gotten a few wins recently, but it still feels like a strange team, right? Where it's like Malik Monk and Zach Levine in the backcourt together. Then it's DeRozan and Keegan Murray and Sabonis, and then Jonas Valanciunas is now the backup center. Now they added Markel Fultz, right? So just a very unique mishmash of players, mostly on the offensive end. But I guess in fairness, before we get to the All Star festivities, what do you think of the New Look Kings? Because there's a lot of different pieces here, that I think again, like it's nice that you got Levine, after trading De'Aaron Fox. He has not played as well recently. He's having, he had a good game, I think, in this last game that's going on. But by and large, what do you feel? Do you feel different about this Kings team compared to, I guess, before? I mean, like, because they have been winning some of these games, but it feels so strange to see this group of guys where, I guess now like Malik Monk and Zach LaVine and DeRozan all share ball handling, playmaking abilities. None of these guys can defend at a super high level. I mean, Keon Ellis off the bench, right? He can defend and he still plays a lot of minutes. I guess it helps now that you have a backup center in Valanciunas that's better than the backup centers they had before. They did get Jake LaRavia, but do you think this team can challenge for a play-in spot? Because I mean, they're hanging around, and right now I think they're 8 or 9 in the playoffs standings right now.
I mean, with the collective talent, you would think that they would at least make the play-in, but then you sit down and watch the games, and you're like, this is awkward. I don't think there's enough ball to go around. You know what I mean? Where it's like you have a lot of guys that are, scorers on the offensive end, obviously. And I think Sabonis is fine, but, that then you have to drill down and look at Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Malik Monk at the point guard is interesting as well. So, I just feel like there isn't a sense of structure. And I don't really know what you do going forward because, I mean, it sucks to lose Fox. And obviously he won it out. But at the end of the day, I mean, I don't think Levine was or is going to be the answer long term for real. Just looking at it, I just don't. I just don't see it. He doesn't really replicate anything that Fox brought to the table, in my opinion. So I feel like they've got to look elsewhere for that if they even want to do that going forward. Because I don't know what the identity of this roster is at this point. Like it just seems like a hodgepodge of scorers, and that's fine, I guess. And like you said, Keon Ellis coming off the bench is great as well, but I mean, there's not really a whole lot elsewhere, and I think that's the problem. It's too one-dimensional for me to really believe in them to go anywhere.
Right, yeah. Now we go into the All-Star festivities, right? And again, there's a lot going on here. So I guess we can start off with, everyone's favorite, right? The Celebrity All-Star game. Right now, again, we don't always know a lot of the people in these games, but just some of the highlights, right? Kai Cenat, streamer, obviously, Drewski, right? Famous comedian. Just a few former pro basketball players, right? Matt Barnes, Baron Davis. You got some WNBA stars, Alicia Gray, and Kayla Thornton. But what do you think of these two teams, right? Which one are you kind of looking at? Because, again, I think when you look at Team Rice and Team Rice, right, where you got, Chris Brickley, right, who's, basketball trainer, right, of course, and others, that seems like the better team. But what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going with Team Rice and Lame for sure. Yeah, I think Chris Brickley being at the top carries. If you know anything about Chris Brickley, former college hooper and very esteemed NBA trainer. So we already know that the guy gets buckets. I just think he outclasses, almost everybody on the other team, outside of maybe like, former NBA players and whatnot. But even then, he's younger. And yeah, he's all about ball every day. He lives and breathes it. So I think, he's probably going to be my pick for MVP, and he's the sole reason that team is probably going to win.
Yeah, agreed. Then we move on, and we'll kind of move on to the other portions of the All-Star festivities, right? So then I guess the 3-point contest, right? So again, the rules for that one is pretty much the same as it's always been, right? The 3-point contest, I think, has been one of the better events usually for the All-Star weekend, right? Again, the rules are relatively simple, easy to follow, and there's usually, right, I think you can kind of see, there's always really fun, like when you watch these guys, and then there's pressure, and then there's always kind of like like a Hollywood finish right at the end. But in terms of the 3-point shooters, right, in the competition, you got Jalen Brunson, right, Cade Cunningham, Darius Garland, Tyler Hero, Buddy Hield, Cam Johnson, Damian Lillard, and then Norman Powell, right? So we have a few people here who are returning, right, to the 3-point contest, right, because Lillard's obviously been in it before. Billy and Buddy Hield was in it before too. I think both of those were former winners, right? If I'm not mistaken. So, just in general, what are you kind of thinking of from the 3-point contest perspective?
I mean, this is a solid group of guys. I think, you have, a severe underdog, I think, in Cade Cunningham. You have some
Yeah.
solid picks, I think, in Cam Johnson, Jalen Brunson, Darius Garland. But I think, the top four guys are probably going to be like Dame, Buddy, Hero, and Norman Powell. I think they're the most consistent. I think they definitely have the best spot up jumper, in my opinion, as well. So
Mm.
that's going to help. But, it depends, like, because it's all about pace. There's a lot of factors that go into the 3-point contest, but I think Dame is the clear cut favorite at the moment. But for me, it's probably between Dame and Buddy Hield, but I'm probably going to go with Dame. I think he's got one more in him.
Okay. I think that's a pretty good pick, right? I think I'll go with him too, right? Just
Yeah,
from the
it's a safe
perspective,
one.
like you said, he's a two-time defending champ, so he's already done it before, right? So
Yep.
it's like he's already been in the situation. I mean, of course, he could have a bad night because that could always happen in the 3-point contest.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a few of these guys. I don't. All these guys, like you said, aside from Cunningham, are really, really good. Have been shooting the three really well this year.
Yeah.
So you almost kind of wonder if there's like a fake out almost where like Cade Cunningham just kind of gets hot. But
Yeah, that
like
would
you
be
said,
crazy.
in general, I think the Dame one is probably the easiest pick just because we've seen him in the situation before. And again, he's also the guy right where he's got the money ball and he's got the deep areas of the 3-point contest, right? Kind of sorted out where those are probably going to be his best spots compared
Yeah.
to some of these other guys where they may be just as good, but maybe not have quite as much range. So he can kind of make up for some of the gaps there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Then we also have the dunk contest, right? This has been, kind of, a contest that's changed a lot over time, obviously. I mean, in terms of, the rules and everything else, it just seems like they have not been able to quite get this one right in a long, long time. But in terms of the people in the contest, you got Mac McClung returning, right? He's looking for the three-peat, right? We had an opportunity for a three-peat, earlier, right, in the week, but we did not get it. And so Mac McClung might be the one that kind of pulls it off. And then you have Andre Jackson Jr., right, for the Milwaukee Bucks, right? That's the guard that starts on the team, right? He was on the UConn team, right? Then you got Matas Bucelis, right? That's the Chicago Bulls rookie, who now with all the deals they've made, now he's starting. He's actually played really well for them. Then you got Stephon Castle, right, for the Spurs, also the other lottery pick. So a lot of really good athletes in this one, but what are we thinking here?
Super worried about how this one's going to look. I think the obvious pick is Mac McClung. I think he's going to three-peat. Because the other contestants, as good of as good as athletes as they are, from what I've seen, they're more on the line of Jaylen Brown. Very good in-game dunkers. Like we've seen Stephon Castle put people on some crazy posters, but I don't know if he has enough bounce or creativity to compete with Mac McClung's classic reverse windmill whatever thing. So I mean, I don't know. I think Mac McClung's got it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the tough part is that they're gonna have to match the creativity where he's been able to do some dunks that just kind of stand out from the rest of the crowd. It's just a matter of can anyone else match him? Does he have any new dunks that he's gonna introduce? And that's where again it should be interesting. Again, I feel like the dunk contest has kind of lost its luster compared to previous years, but.
Agreed.
I think it should still, there should still be some fun elements here just to kind of see what, all the guys can kind of do.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Then, we got the skills contest. So the skills contest, I feel like, has been generally my least favorite one, if I'm going to be
Agreed.
honest.
Yeah.
I mean, again, the rules are always different. And I feel like a lot of the rules tend to just not really be that good. I mean, we had like a couple, right, where guys were just shooting half court shots just to be able to cheat, right, to be able to advance the ball further. Then they had it, in the skills challenge, and that wasn't really good either.
No.
So, this one, I mean, again, of course, there's not really a whole lot you can do about that. But, I mean, in terms of the people in the challenge, right? You got Team Cavs, Team Rooks, Team Spurs, and Team Warriors. So a little bit more streamlined in terms of the teams this time around, right? For Team Cavs, you got Mitchell and Mobley. For Rooks, you got Risa Shea and Alex Sarr, right? For the Spurs, you got CP3 and Wemby. And then for the Warriors, you got Draymond and Moses Moody, right? So I think, again, it's a little bit more streamlined, I think, this time around. And, we'll see more of what they do, but which team you look at kind of here? Because, there's a lot of different picks, right? Because, you got the guard and the big, you got, kind of the versatile forwards, right? And then you have, kind of a little bit of an in-between sort of right there. So what do you think?
Yeah, this one is kind of weird, hard to gauge and hard to judge because, yeah, the format is changed once again, like you said, and I don't really know what to expect going into it. But I feel like Team Cavs is probably the safe pick, but I'm gonna go with Team Spurs. I think they might be able to finesse something, but I think
Hmm.
I'm not really looking at Rooks or Warriors. I just think that's kind of a wash. So I think it's between Cavs and Spurs.
Yeah, I think I agree with Team Spurs where it's like, where mainly it's the Wemby factor, right? Where he
Right.
can kind of just he's got certain skill sets that some of these guys might have, but again, as we know, he's also 7'4", right? So
Hmm.
there's kind of an element there where I think, and he's kind of been talking about the idea of how he really wants to take this, really seriously, and I think there's an element there where it should be really fun because I just think, for him, if he's going to do that and he's going to try to put himself on the map, right? Because this is his first time as an All Star,
Yep.
right? I think this is, like you said, one of the safer picks, right?
Yeah.
Just because there's a little bit more versatility there. Now, obviously, like with Chris Paul, right? It's not quite the same, but it's also an all-star competition. So he can do some things that maybe like in a normal, 82 game regular season, 48-minute game, he might not do.
Hmm.
But for like a skills contest, he could probably still pull off. And then we also have the Rising Stars Challenge, right?
Oh
Where you
boy.
have 28 players divided into 4 teams, right, to be coached by Warriors franchise favorites, right, according to Yahoo Sports. So for the rosters, NBA's assistant coaches selected 10 rookies and 11 sophomores to participate in the game, right? Victor Wembanyama, Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson, Derek Lively, Kaysen Wallace, and Jared McCain were originally on the rosters, but will not play. Now, obviously, for Wemby, he's in the regular All-Star game, so that's the main reason why, and everyone else is hurt, right? So, really, it's Anthony Black, Tamani Kamara, Brandon Pajemski, Julian Strother, Sor Thompson, and Ryan Dunn, right? So, for the 4 teams, Team Chris, right? So that's Chris Mullen. You got Stephon Castle, Ryan Dunn, Zach Edey, Keontae George, Trace Jackson Davis, Dalton Connect, and Jalen Wells. And then for Team Mitch Richmond, right? Because this is, the tribute to the Warriors because the All Star game is in San Francisco. So for Team Mitch, you got Tamani Kamara, Bob Carrington, Bilal Coulibaly, Scoot Henderson, Yves Misi, Amen Thompson, and Asor Thompson. Then for Team Tim Hardaway Jr., or not Tim Hardaway Jr., Tim Hardaway Sr., Anthony Black, Tristan Da Silva, Grady Dick, Jaime Jaquez Jr., Zachary Risachet, Alex Sarr, and Kaysen Wallace. And then for Team Jeremy, you got, which is Jeremy Lin's team, you got J.D. Davison, Mac McClung, Bryce McGowans, Leonard Miller, Dink Pate, Reed Shepard, and Pat Spencer. That's the G League team. So, what are we thinking of here?
This one's interesting because I think I do like a lot of the young guys on, all these rosters, but I'm gonna go with Team Mitch Richmond. I think I like the defensive identity that they have. They've got some underrated rookies like Eves Missy. I think he's been pretty solid as a rookie, but you've also got some players who are kind of underrated, like Tamani Kamara, Bilal Coulibaly, the Thompson twins. I think they have like a level of athleticism, and defense that I think might bother some of these other teams, especially, since Wemby's not playing. I think that's a big one, but I do think that Chris Mullen's roster is pretty solid as well.
Yeah, I think those are probably the main 2 that stand out. And I think, with again with Team Chris, you got a little bit more physicality, right? Because you got Castle, you got Dunn, you got Edey, and then you have a little bit of shooting you can mix in there, right? With like Jalen Wells and Dalton Connect, Keontae George, right? It's not really that small, other than George, right? It's a relatively big roster, right? And then, like you mentioned with Team Mitch, you got a lot going for you there, right?
Hmm.
Because, like you said, you have a lot more wings type players on there, right? Like Kamara, like Koulibaly, like the Thompson twins. And then you got, your athletic guards, right, with Scoot and Bub Carrington, right? And then you got, kind of Yves Misi, I guess, as your other big. So I might lean Team Chris, but like you said, I think those are probably your two best teams. But I do kind of like the identities for both. But I'm actually
Yeah.
gonna go a little bit different and go with Team Chris. But wouldn't shock me if Team Mitch won.
Yeah. Sweet.
Is there a pathway for Team Jeremy?
Maybe. I think if Reed Shepard pops off, maybe. Outside of that, probably not. Because I'm not too high on McGowan's. Kind of already know what JD Davidson can do. I'm curious what Reed Shepard looks like.
Also, why is Reed Shepard on Team Jeremy? Why
Good
wouldn't he just
question.
be? Yeah, why wouldn't he just be on one of the other teams?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess he's
Yeah,
assigned to the G League for some reason.
because most of the other guys are, like two-way guys. They're not. I mean, I don't think they're really part of the normal roster, if
Right.
I'm not
They're
mistaken.
G Leaguers.
Right. So I don't know. Kind of
Weird.
weird.
Mm-hmm.
Oh well. But moving on, then you have the big event, right? That's the All-Star game itself. Of course, it's always, an interesting time. Now, of course, the teams are really different this time around, right? Where they scrapped, a lot of the more traditional style setups for the All-Star game. This time they have what, like four different teams, right? Where you have the TNT crew, right? You got Chuck, you got Kenny, you got Shaq. I believe also Candace, right? They have their different teams that they're working with, right? Because hers, I think, it's whoever wins the Rising Stars game. But the other teams, right? Those consist of the actual people on the
Yeah.
All Star team, right? So for Barkley's team, right, you got SGA, Jokic, Donovan Mitchell, Şengün, Siakam, Cat, Wemby, and then Trey Young, right? Trey Young was an injury replacement because Giannis, right, is going to be out for the remainder of the All Star break, right, or through the All Star break, at least a week or so. Um, then you got Kenny's team, right? You got Jalen Brunson, Cade Cunningham, Ant Man, Garland, Hero, Jaren Jackson Jr., Evan Mobley, and then Jalen Williams. And then for Shaq, right? Shaq's OGs, you got Jalen Brown, Steph, Durant, Harden, Kyrie, LeBron, Lillard, and Tatum, right? So a lot of the older guys on Shaq's team. So, which, in terms of how it works, how does this work?
Yeah, that's the thing that I don't really understand. So like, is it a tournament? It's a
Yeah,
tournament, right?
exactly. Yeah, it's a tournament where you have, semifinal one, right, is Barkley versus Kenny, and then the winner of that plays the winner of Shaq and Candace's team, right? And then obviously the two winners will play against each other for the All-Star Championship. So we're gonna have multiple teams, and then I guess some of them will get eliminated because, like you said, it's the tournament style.
Yeah, I mean that's cool and all, but like me personally, I prefer like a classic East versus West with
Hmm.
some competitive moments. That's what I really want from the All Star game. But at the end of the day, I mean, if we're picking who's gonna win it, I'm probably going to lean more towards Chuck's team. I think they do have, some solid options on the offensive end. Obviously, SGA, Jokic, Wemby as well, Şengün, and I like the size that they have as well. That's the key thing for me. And I know it's going to be tough to contend with. I think they're being dubbed as OGs and stuff like that. Steph, Braun, KD. And they do have the wings as well, like Jason Tatum, Jalen Brown, Kyrie as a guard. So I think the rosters are fairly balanced, probably outside of Kenny's team. I don't know what that was, but Chuck's team I think is the one that I'm going to pick to win it all.
Yeah, I think that's probably your best bet because you got a good mix, different guys, right? Where again you got SGA, right, as kind of like a two-way guard, right? And then you got him, with Mitchell. You do have a lot of bigs though, right? You don't, and that's kind of the weakness there, where you don't really have wings. So you kind of wonder how they're able to kind of figure out, how to slow down the other teams, with either the really big guards or the forwards. Like say for I don't know, for Chuck's team, right? How do they slow down like a Cade Cunningham? How do they slow down, an Ant-Man, right? They have a bunch of bigs, right? So you got Wemby, you got Towns, you got Jokic, right? So you have, three this season at least, like top five, 7 centers in the league. So yeah, that's the one where it's tough. And like, because with the OGs one, the only thing is that there's a few guys that aren't really OGs. Like Tatum and Brown are not
Sure,
OG,
sure.
right? Because they're not older players. They're, you know, in their prime type guys, right?
Right.
Everyone else is obviously, a little bit older. But, and then like you said, for that team, they have no center, right? Now, for their smaller lineups, they'll be ridiculous, right? Because you can have Durant, LeBron, and Steph, and Tatum and Brown all together, right? In
Right.
addition to the other guys, right? So I don't know, dude. I mean,
It's
it
tough. It's a tough pick.
is, yeah, it is tough. I might lean Shaq's one just
Okay.
just because I think there's a little bit more versatility they can put together with the lineups. But like you said, it's tough. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to see how the format looks because it hasn't been done before, and
Yeah.
that's where I'm excited to see what that looks like. Even though like my initial feeling was I don't really love it, but I'm certainly open to it.
Oh,
And if it
trust me, I
looks
hate
good
it.
and it's awesome, then keep it.
Yeah, trust me, I hate it already, but it is what it is.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. I mean, it should be a fun event. I mean, All
Yeah.
Star Weekend is usually something. I mean, I know the last couple of years it's been kind of a lot of negative talk about the All Star Weekend, so I'm hopeful that it turns around. Maybe it looks better. I mean, again, some of that's just going to kind of come down to do guys care, right? And there just
Mm-hmm.
hasn't been really enough of that in the All Star Weekend, and it's understandable, right? Because for a lot of these guys, they don't want to necessarily put themselves in a position where they don't want to get hurt over a game that doesn't really count for a lot. So it's kind of hard to put the incentive there, but there's always at least moments that I think will look fun, right? Especially again when I think some of the veteran guys will be playing together. But that pretty much wraps it up for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. So we appreciate all the likes and comments and support, right? If you leave a comment, we'll read it, at the end of the video. And again, continue to like and subscribe to help our channel grow. We appreciate it, and we'll see you in the next episode.